The sky didn't change that night. No alarms, no flashes, no sense that history was about to tilt. Above us, the stars stayed quiet, patient, ancient. And yet, far beyond the reach of our eyes, something was already moving. For months, astronomers had been tracking it in silence. A faint object, cold, distant, drifting along the ecliptic like countless others before it. They named it 3I/Atlas. Just another visitor, they thought. Another piece of rock and ice obeying the same old rules. Gravity in, gravity out. The universe has done this dance for billions of years. And humans have learned to trust the math. Every orbit, every arc, every rise and fall of light, predictable, comforting, so no one rushed, no one panicked. The data came in slowly, as it always does. Numbers filling spreadsheets. Graphs forming clean curves. Lines rising exactly when they should. At first, 3I/Atlas was still far from the sun. Too far for drama, too far for headlines. It was quiet work, the kind that happens late at night, with coffee growing cold beside glowing screens. A few astronomers checked the data. Then a few more, routine, until one of them paused. Because the light curve didn't look right, not broken, not wild, just wrong. Too flat in places where it should rise, too sharp where it should soften. A hesitation, like the object was thinking. At first, the reaction was simple. It's noise. It always is. Cosmic dust, instrument error, a shadow from a passing star. The universe is messy. Data is never clean. So they recalibrated. They checked the sensors. They corrected for distance. They ran the math again. And again. But the curve didn't move. The light coming off 3I/Atlas wasn't behaving like a natural body should. It wasn't brightening smoothly as it approached the sun. It wasn't fading the way ice and rock normally do. Instead, it slowed, as if something pressed gently on the brakes. That's when the room got quieter. Because in astronomy, patterns matter, and hesitation is not a known behavior of space. Weeks passed, the object drifted closer. More observatories joined in. Different countries, different instruments, different skies, all watching the same point of darkness and all seeing the same thing. A light curve that refused to follow the script. No explosions. No tails bursting outward, just subtle defiance. A curve that bent when it should have flowed. One scientist described it later as uncomfortable. Not frightening, not exciting, just uncomfortable, like a sentence that ends the wrong way. At night, screens glowed with plots and numbers. People leaned in closer. Someone joked about aliens. No one laughed, because jokes only work when everyone knows they're impossible. And suddenly, that certainty wasn't there anymore. The strange part wasn't how dramatic the anomaly was. It was how quiet it felt. No violent movement, no chaos, just a steady refusal to match expectation. As if 3I/Atlas didn't care what humans believed space was supposed to do. Some suggested it was tumbling. Others said it might be an odd shape, long, thin, reflecting light in strange angles. All reasonable, all safe. But none of them fully explained the hesitation, the pause, the moment where the brightness should have climbed and didn't. That pause became the center of attention. People started marking it with circles, highlighting it in red, zooming in, as if staring long enough might force it to confess. But the data stayed calm, almost polite. As days turned into months, something subtle happened. The language changed. Not in public papers, not in headlines, but in private conversations. Words like error were replaced with behavior. Noise became response. The object wasn't misbehaving, it was behaving differently. And that difference had timing. The hesitation appeared again. And again. Each time 3I/Atlas moved closer to warmth, it slowed its change, as if resisting, as if measuring. That's when a thought crept in, uninvited. What if this wasn't passive? What if the object wasn't just reflecting light, but choosing how to reflect it? No one wrote that down. Not yet, because science moves carefully. Because extraordinary ideas require extraordinary silence before they are spoken. Still, eyes lingered longer on the screen. Still, people checked the clock twice. The universe had always been indifferent to human attention. Stars burn whether we watch or not. Comets flare whether we care or not. But 3I/Atlas felt different. Not because it was loud, but because it was subtle. Almost respectful, like a knock on the door instead of a crash through the wall. Outside, the night sky remained unchanged. People slept. Cities glowed. The earth spun, unaware. And far away, an object continued its quiet approach. No signals. No messages. No declarations. Just a light curve that whispered, "I am not what you expected." That whisper was enough, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The math still worked. Gravity still pulled. But something else was layered on top. Something thin, precise, intentional. And a question began to form. Not shouted, not announced, just hovering in the back of the mind. If this was only a rock, why did it hesitate? And if it wasn't only a rock, then what, exactly, had entered our sky? As 3I/Atlas continued its silent drift, human certainty began to drift with it. And somewhere between numbers and starlight, between expectation and observation, the waiting sky became something else. Not empty. Not passive, but alert, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if we would notice. The numbers were supposed to be calm, predictable, smooth, unemotional. That's what numbers do. They don't pause, they don't doubt, they don't hesitate. And yet, as 3I/Atlas moved closer to perihelion, the numbers did something no one expected. They slowed down. At first, everything looked normal. The object was falling inward, pulled by the sun's gravity. As it warmed, its brightness should rise, steady and clean. That's how comets work. That's how space works. Ice heats up. Gas escapes. Light increases. Simple. The first few data points followed the rulebook perfectly. Then they didn't. The brightness climbed and then stopped. Not dropped, not spiked, just stalled, as if the object reached a thought and paused mid-sentence. Astronomers stared at the curve. It flattened in a place where physics said it shouldn't. Someone frowned. Someone leaned closer to the screen. "This doesn't make sense." That phrase appeared quietly, almost embarrassed, because when something doesn't make sense in space science, it usually means one thing: you made a mistake. So they went looking for it. The instruments were checked first, sensors recalibrated, lenses cleaned, timings verified. Different telescopes were asked the same question. They all gave the same answer. The brightness had stalled. Maybe it was distance. They corrected for that. Maybe it was angle. They adjusted again. Maybe the sun's output fluctuated. They factored that in too. Still, the curve refused to move. The numbers held their breath. Days passed. 3I/Atlas drifted closer to the sun, and once again the brightness rose. Relief spread. There it is, back to normal. But the relief didn't last, because it happened again. Another pause, another hesitation. Another moment where the math lost its confidence. This wasn't random. Random things don't repeat with timing, and this timing mattered. Each stall occurred as the object crossed a specific threshold of heat, almost like a checkpoint, as if something inside 3I/Atlas reacted to warmth. Not instantly, but deliberately. People began whispering new explanations. Maybe it's layered, they said. Thick crust, thin interior. Heat takes time to penetrate. Reasonable. But when models were run, the delay was too clean, too sharp. Natural materials smear change. They blur it. This didn't blur. It stopped, then continued. Like a switch, someone pointed out something uncomfortable. If this were a machine, this is what regulation would look like. The room went quiet. No one responded. Not because the idea was accepted, but because it was hard to reject. Machines pause. They wait. They respond to thresholds. Nature usually doesn't. At least, not this cleanly. The sun burned steadily. Radiation poured outward. And 3I/Atlas chose when to brighten. That choice was the problem, because once you see choice in data, you can't unsee it. The anomaly grew stronger as perihelion approached. The closer the object moved towards the sun, the more controlled its behavior became. No wild flares, no runaway heating, just measured steps. Brightness, pause. Brightness, pause. As if the object was breathing. Slow, deliberate, aware. Late at night, scientists sat alone with the graphs. No press, no public panic, just humans, staring at lines that refused to act like lines should. Some tried to laugh it off. Maybe it's shy. The joke landed flat. Because shyness implies awareness. And awareness was the last thing anyone wanted to introduce into the equation. Emails started to carry softer language. Not claims, not conclusions, just questions. Have you seen this? Are you getting the same stall? Is your curve flattening too? Yes, yes, yes. Across observatories, across continents, the answer stayed the same. The numbers hesitated everywhere. That's when the tone changed. Not to fear, to caution. Because fear is loud. This was quiet. This was the sound of certainty eroding. The textbooks didn't shatter. They just loosened. Gravity still worked. Orbits still held. But inside that framework, something new had appeared. A behavior. A response. A pause that felt intentional. And the scariest part wasn't that we didn't understand it. It was that it felt understandable in a way we didn't like seeing a shadow move in a room you thought was empty. The pause ended. The brightness resumed its climb. As if nothing had happened. as if the object had finished waiting, and the data rolled on. Clean, orderly, misleadingly calm. But everyone watching knew the truth. Something had broken. Not the instruments, not the math, the assumption. The assumption that everything in the sky is passive, that objects don't react, that the universe never pauses to consider us. As 3I/Atlas continued its slow fall toward the sun, the numbers kept coming, still precise, still beautiful, but now watched differently, because hesitation is a human thing. And when we saw it in the data, we didn't just question the object, we questioned ourselves. Why did it pause? What was it waiting for? And more importantly, if this was hesitation, what happens when it decides to stop waiting? At first, no one noticed it, not because it wasn't there, but because it was small, so small it hid inside the noise. A tiny rise, a tiny fall, barely a whisper in the data, the kind of thing scientists are trained to ignore, because space is full of static, cosmic dust, background radiation, random flickers from distant stars. Noise is everywhere. So when the first fluctuation appeared in the reflectivity data of 3I/Atlas, it was marked and moved past. Nothing to see here, just another ripple in a noisy universe. But then it happened again. Same size, same spacing, another rise, another fall. Still easy to dismiss, still easy to forget, until someone didn't. Late one night, scrolling through raw data, an astronomer slowed down, not because the signal was strong, but because it felt familiar. Like a beat you don't hear at first, until your body starts to feel it. The rises weren't random. They were timed, evenly spaced. Not perfectly, but close enough to be unsettling. A few seconds apart. Then again and again. The word pulse wasn't used yet. Not out loud, because once you name something, it becomes real. So instead, they filtered it. Hard. They stripped away background noise, corrected for distance, adjusted for instrument drift. The pulse vanished. Relief, there it is, just noise, after all, until the next filter, and the one after that. Because every time the data was cleaned, the pulse came back, fainter, but intact, like a shadow that refuses to leave when you turn on the light. Different observatories were checked, different instruments, different wavelengths, and there it was, everywhere. A rhythmic change in reflectivity, as if 3I/Atlas wasn't just reflecting sunlight, but modulating it. Tiny changes, precise timing, a rise, a fall, again, again, not fast, not dramatic, slow enough to feel intentional. Someone finally said it. This isn't random. No one argued, because randomness doesn't survive scrutiny. Patterns do. The pulse didn't care how much they zoomed in. It didn't care how much they filtered. It remained steady, patient, almost polite, as if waiting for us to catch up. The spacing between pulses was measured, then measured again. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't chaotic either. Natural systems drift. They wobble. This didn't wobble much. It held its rhythm like a tired heart, still beating. The room felt different now. Not excited. Not afraid. Just alert. Because a pulse changes everything. A pulse implies repetition. Repetition implies control. And control implies something acting, not just existing. People tried to explain it away. Maybe the object was rotating, spinning unevenly, reflecting light at regular angles. A good idea. So they modeled rotation, different shapes, different speeds. None of them fit cleanly. The pulse timing didn't match rotation. It was too slow, too deliberate. Maybe jets of gas were turning on and off. Another good idea. But gas doesn't turn on and off like a switch. It sputters. It fades. This didn't. The rise was clean. The fall was clean. Like a signal being toggled. Someone whispered a word. They immediately regretted. Signal. Signals imply intent. Signals imply someone or something. On the other end, no one wanted that. So the word was buried, replaced with safer language. Periodic variation, reflectivity, oscillation. Long phrases that hide short truths. But the truth stayed. The pulse continued, even as 3I/Atlas moved closer to the sun, even as conditions changed, even as heat increased. The rhythm held. Tick, pause, tick, pause, not speeding up, not slowing down, as if the object carried its own internal clock. That's when a deeper fear crept in. What if this wasn't caused by the sun at all? What if the pulse would exist even in the dark? The idea was tested. Old data was rechecked. Data from when the object was colder, farther, quieter. And there it was, weaker, but present. The pulse didn't start near the sun. It didn't end near the sun. It was always there, waiting to be noticed. The realization landed softly and then spread. This wasn't a reaction, it was a feature. And features don't happen by accident. Silence filled the room. Not awkward silence. Heavy silence. The kind where everyone is thinking the same thought and hoping someone else says it first. If this is a pulse, what is it pacing? Energy? Temperature? Computation? Or time? Because time matters. Time is how machines work. They don't rush. They don't panic. They tick. Steady, reliable, unemotional. Just like this. Someone finally broke the silence. If it wanted to hide, this is how it would do it. The pulse wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It hid inside uncertainty, inside noise, inside human doubt. And that made it worse, because it meant the pulse wasn't careless. It was subtle, designed to be ignored unless you were looking very closely. The question changed. It was no longer, is there a pattern? That question was answered. The new question was harder. Why show it at all? Why pulse? Why not stay silent? Unless silence itself was part of the design. Unless the pulse wasn't meant to be a message, but a side effect, like heat from a processor, like rhythm from a system running in the background, doing something else, something we couldn't see. As 3I/Atlas continued its quiet journey, the pulse continued too, unbothered by our confusion, unchanged by our attention. A steady beat, deep in the dark. And for the first time, a terrifying idea settled in. What if this object isn't waking up? What if it's always been awake? And what we're seeing now is just the sound of it working. The pulse didn't answer us. It didn't grow louder. It didn't stop. It just kept going. Tick, pause. Tick, pause. And somewhere between the rises and falls, between reflectivity and shadow, the universe felt less empty than it did before, because something out there was keeping time, in the dark, waiting for the next move. The heat should have been simple. As 3I/Atlas fell closer to the sun, everything we know said one thing should happen. It should warm up, not evenly, not perfectly, but predictably. Sunlight pours in. Ice absorbs heat. Temperature rises. That's the rule. That's the rhythm the universe has followed since the first comet ever passed a star. So when the thermal data arrived, no one expected surprises. At first, there weren't any. Surface temperatures climbed exactly as the models predicted. Slow, steady, comforting. Then something shifted. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to feel wrong. One region of the object warmed faster than expected. Another cooled. At the same time, the numbers were checked, then checked again. Cooling didn't make sense. Not here, not now. The sun was stronger than ever at this distance. There was no shadow large enough, no rotation fast enough. Nothing to explain why one part of the object would lose heat while another gained it. At first, they blamed geometry. Maybe the surface was uneven. Maybe it was pitted, cracked. Comets are messy things, so they mapped it. High resolution. Careful overlays. And that's when the pattern emerged. The warm regions weren't random, neither were the cool ones. They shifted, slowly, like plates sliding beneath a surface. As one area warmed, another cooled, as if heat was being moved, redistributed. Not lost, not gained, managed. That word appeared in someone's notes and was quickly crossed out. Managed implies intent, so they replaced it with something safer. Thermal anomaly. But calling something an anomaly doesn't make it disappear. It just admits you don't understand it. The thermal pattern kept changing. Not violently, not chaotically. Smooth transitions, purposeful motion. Like watching lights turn on and off in different rooms of a building, one after another. The sun didn't flicker. Space didn't change. Only the object did. That's when the deeper problem became impossible to ignore. Natural objects don't shift heat internally like this. They radiate outward. They leak. They don't redirect. But 3I/Atlas seemed to be doing exactly that, moving heat away from some regions, concentrating it in others. Almost like regulation, almost like control. Someone ran a simulation, then another, then hundreds. Ice and rock couldn't do this. Not cleanly, not repeatedly. Not without leaving signatures we weren't seeing. There were no massive jets, no explosive vents, just quiet adjustment, as if the object was protecting itself, or optimizing. The pulse was checked against the thermal data, and that's when the room went still. Because the changes lined up. Not perfectly, but close enough. Each thermal shift followed the same rhythm as the reflectivity pulse. Tick, adjust, pause, stabilize, tick, adjust. The object wasn't just reflecting light differently. It was handling heat differently, on purpose. The implications sat heavy. If this was passive, it would react instantly to sunlight. If this was chaotic, it would fluctuate wildly. This was neither. It was measured, deliberate, almost careful. Someone asked the question no one wanted to answer. What if it's responding to stress? Stress. The sun is stress. Radiation, heat, pressure. And 3I/Atlas was dealing with it, calmly, like something designed to survive harsh environments. The idea of a machine surfaced again. Not loudly, not officially, just there. Machines regulate heat. They have to. Too much heat destroys function. Too little stops activity. Thermal balance is survival. And suddenly, the object didn't look like a frozen relic anymore. It looked like a system. One that didn't panic as conditions changed. One that adapted. The most unsettling part wasn't the warm areas, it was the cold ones. Because cooling requires effort. You don't cool by accident when the sun is this close. Cooling means heat is going somewhere else. Moved, stored, used. And used for what? No one could say. The data didn't tell us why, only that something was happening beneath the surface. Something hidden. The object didn't glow brighter when it warmed. It didn't flare when stressed. It stayed quiet, contained. That restraint felt intentional, almost respectful, like it didn't want to draw attention, but attention was unavoidable now. The models were breaking. Not catastrophically, suddenly. Each one failed by just enough to matter, and subtle failure is worse than obvious failure, because it forces you to question assumptions you didn't know you were making. Assumptions like objects don't care, objects don't adapt, objects don't protect themselves. As perihelion drew closer, the thermal shifts became more precise, not stronger, sharper, cleaner, like tuning, fine adjustments to maintain balance. The sun pushed harder. 3I/Atlas pushed back silently. No alarms, no warnings, just a quiet refusal to overheat. That's when a frightening thought settled in. What if this isn't about survival? What if this is about function? What if the object needs a certain temperature to do whatever it's doing? The pulse, the hesitation, the heat. They all connected now. Pieces of the same behavior. A system reacting to environment without panic, without randomness, with intent. And intent changes everything. Because intent implies purpose, and purpose implies origin. Someone shut their laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling, not in fear, in disbelief. Because this wasn't science fiction. This was data, cold, measured, real. The sun burned on, the object moved closer, and still it held itself together. Cooling where it should burn, warming where it should freeze, as if following rules we didn't write, as if answering to something we couldn't see. The question was no longer simple. It wasn't, what is this object? It was, who designed it to behave this way? Or worse, what is it still doing right now? The thermal pattern shifted again, quietly, deliberately. And in that moment, one truth became impossible to ignore. 3I/Atlas was not just enduring the sun, it was interacting with it, responding, controlling. And if that was true, then this object wasn't just passing through our system. It was operating within it, silently, precisely. And whatever it was built to do, it hadn't stopped yet. At some point, the data stopped feeling separate. Light over here, heat over there, motion plotted on its own lonely chart. For weeks, each anomaly had been studied alone, like pieces of a puzzle kept in different rooms. But then, someone did something simple. They layered it all together. Light curve. Thermal shifts, velocity changes, stacked, aligned, timed. And that's when the pattern revealed itself. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Slowly, like an image coming into focus. The pauses in brightness lined up with the heat redistribution. The thermal shifts lined up with tiny changes in motion. And the motion lined up with the pulse. Not perfectly, but efficiently. Nothing wasted, nothing chaotic. The object wasn't reacting randomly to space. It was coordinating its responses. That coordination was the turning point. Because randomness looks messy when you zoom out. This didn't. It got cleaner. The more data they added, the clearer it became. Each system inside 3I/Atlas seemed aware of the others. When heat rose, light adjusted. When motion changed, heat followed. Like subsystems talking to each other, like a structure. That word lingered in the air. Structure, not shape, not composition. Behavioral structure. The kind you see in systems designed to endure. Someone traced a finger along the combined graph. You see this? Everyone did. A repeating sequence. Input, pause, adjustment, stabilize. Again and again and again. The object wasn't improvising. It was following a process. Natural objects don't run processes. They obey forces. They don't optimize. But this looked optimized. Energy wasn't flaring where it shouldn't. Stress wasn't accumulating. Nothing ran away. Everything stayed within bounds, as if limits had been set. And limits imply foresight. The uncomfortable realization settled in quietly. This thing wasn't just surviving space. It was engineered for it. No one said that out loud. Not yet, because saying it would change everything. So instead, they looked harder. Maybe the pattern would break. Maybe adding more data would smear it. It didn't. The more data they added, the stronger the structure became, like reinforcing lines on a blueprint. One scientist described it later as too neat to be accidental. Neat is a dangerous word in astronomy. The universe is violent, messy, full of extremes. When something is neat, it stands out. 3I/Atlas stood out now. Not because it was loud, but because it was restrained. It didn't waste energy. It didn't overreact. It didn't collapse under pressure. It adjusted just enough. That just enough was the problem. Efficiency is not a natural priority. Nature doesn't care about elegance. It cares about survival through excess. This was different. This was precision. The team tried breaking the pattern. They introduced delays, randomized sampling, removed sections of data. The structure survived. Even incomplete, it hinted at the whole. Like a melody you recognize after just a few notes. The word system appeared again. This time, no one crossed it out. Systems have inputs. Systems have outputs. And systems usually have a reason to exist. What reason could this have? The motion data added another layer of unease. 3I/Atlas wasn't just falling inward. Tiny deviations appeared. Not enough to scream propulsion, but enough to suggest adjustment. Course corrections, without thrust, as if it knew where it wanted to be and where it didn't. That idea was quickly labeled speculative, but it stayed. Because speculation doesn't come from imagination alone. It comes from patterns refusing to go away. The pattern wasn't emotional. It didn't feel curious. It felt cold, functional, like watching a machine regulate itself while ignoring the observer. That indifference was unsettling. If this was built, it wasn't built for us. The human response shifted. Not panic, not awe, humility, because patterns don't care who discovers them. They exist regardless. And this one was now undeniable. Light, heat, motion. 3 separate languages, speaking the same sentence. And the sentence said, intention. Someone asked a quiet question. At what point do we stop calling this coincidence? No one answered, because there wasn't a clean line. No moment where nature ends and design begins. Just a slope, and we were sliding down it. The object continued its approach, still calm, still measured, still doing exactly what it needed to do. Nothing more, nothing less. That restraint felt deliberate, almost disciplined, and discipline is learned or built. The comparison no one wanted to make surfaced anyway. Biology. Living systems regulate, they balance, they adapt. But this didn't feel alive. It felt colder than life, more rigid, less forgiving. Machines do that. They don't heal, they maintain. And maintenance was exactly what this looked like. Maintenance across millions of kilometers, across interstellar space, across time we couldn't measure. The pattern didn't feel new. It felt old, refined, like it had done this before, many times. That thought lingered, heavy and quiet. If this was the result of evolution, it wasn't Earth's kind. If it was built, it wasn't recent. Which meant whatever made it was patient. And patience on a cosmic scale is terrifying. The data kept flowing. The pattern held. And the room changed again. This time, acceptance crept in. Not acceptance of an answer. Acceptance of a question that wouldn't leave. At what point does a pattern stop being natural? Is it when it repeats? When it optimizes? When it adapts without panic? Or is it when we realize we're no longer looking at behavior shaped by chance, but behavior shaped by choice? 3IATLAS offered no clarification. It didn't speed up. It didn't slow down. It didn't break character. It just continued. Efficient, ordered, silent. And in that silence, one truth became clear. We weren't watching chaos organize itself. We were watching organization reveal itself, piece by piece, pattern by pattern, until denial became harder than belief. As the object moved closer to the sun, the structure tightened, the behavior sharpened, and the question deepened. If this is the shape of a pattern, then what is the shape of its purpose? Because patterns don't exist alone. They exist to serve something. And whatever that something was, it was still unfolding. Quietly, methodically. Right in front of us, whether we were ready or not. The silence came without warning. No spike. No final pulse. No fading echo. One moment, the rhythm was there. Steady, familiar, unsettling. And the next, nothing. The pulse that had haunted the data for weeks simply vanished. At first, no one believed it. Silence is suspicious in science. It usually means something broke, so they checked, then checked again. The instruments were fine. The clocks were synced. The data stream was clean, too clean 3I/Atlas was still there, still moving, still reflecting sunlight. But the pulse, the quiet heartbeat hiding inside the noise, was gone. The light curve smoothed out. The thermal shifts settled. The strange coordination loosened, just slightly, not enough to return to normal, enough to feel intentional. For days, the object stayed quiet. No rhythm, no repetition, no signal hiding in the static. Just silence, perfect silence. And that was worse than the anomaly itself, because noise is comforting. Noise means chaos. Silence means control. The first reaction was relief. Maybe it's over. Maybe the system finally broke down. Maybe the pulse burned itself out. That's what everyone wanted to believe. An exhausted anomaly is safe. A dying mystery closes itself. But as hours turned into days, the silence began to feel wrong. Too sudden, too complete. Natural systems don't just stop. They decay. They weaken. They leave traces behind. This didn't. The pulse didn't fade. It didn't distort. It didn't slow. It simply ceased, like a switch flipped to off. Someone pulled up the old data, compared it to the present. The contrast was unsettling. It was like listening to a room full of breathing people. And then realizing everyone had stopped at the same time, alive. The idea surfaced slowly. What if the pulse wasn't failing? What if it was choosing silence? That thought didn't belong in a lab. It belonged in a nightmare. Because choosing silence implies awareness. Awareness of being observed. Attention had grown. More telescopes were watching now. More eyes. More scrutiny. 3I/Atlas had become interesting. And that's when it stopped doing the thing that made it interesting. The timing was impossible to ignore. The silence began just as global attention peaked, just as discussions grew louder, just as more models started circling the same conclusion. The pulse vanished when it was no longer hidden. That coincidence sat heavy. Someone whispered, "What if it's avoiding detection?" No one laughed. Because avoidance is a strategy. Do it, and strategies belong to actors, not objects. The silence held. Day 1 passed, then day 2, nothing. No rhythmic flicker, no periodic shift, just smooth, boring data. Almost too boring. The kind of data scientists dream of, the kind that lets you sleep at night. Except no one slept, because the silence felt watched. Like the moment a predator stops moving, not because it's gone, but because it knows you're looking. The human mind hates gaps. It rushes to fill them. But this gap resisted explanation. If the pulse was natural, why stop now? If it was caused by heat, why stop near perihelion? If it was mechanical, why stop at all? Unless silence was part of the behavior. Unless the pulse wasn't always meant to run. Unless it only ran when conditions were right. Conditions like isolation. Conditions like distance. Conditions like privacy. That idea twisted something deep. Because privacy is not a cosmic concept. Stars don't care who watches them. Comets don't hide. But this object had gone quiet exactly when it became the center of attention. That felt deliberate, almost polite, as if saying, "You've seen enough." The thermal data was checked again. Still strange, still controlled, but muted. The coordination hadn't vanished. It had relaxed, like a system idling, waiting. The motion stayed steady. The path, unchanged. No sign of damage, no sign of decay, nothing to suggest exhaustion. The object wasn't struggling, it was resting. Or listening. Emails slowed. Meetings grew quieter. The energy in the room shifted from discovery to unease, because silence forces reflection. And reflection led to an uncomfortable mirror. We weren't just observing 3IATLAS anymore. We were reacting to it, and in doing so, we revealed ourselves. Our curiosity, our impatience, our hunger to label, to name, to explain. And then it stopped giving us anything to explain. The silence felt like a boundary, a line drawn gently but firmly, as if the object was saying, "You are not ready for the next part." Days passed. The sun burned. 3I/Atlas moved closer, still silent. Some began to hope the pulse would return. That hope itself felt dangerous, because it meant we wanted the anomaly back, wanted the mystery, wanted confirmation. And wanting something to be artificial is not science, it's desire. That realization humbled the room. Maybe the silence wasn't about hiding. Maybe it was about restraint, about minimizing interaction, about passing through without interference, like a probe designed to observe, not engage. The question shifted again. Not what is it doing, but what did it already do? If the pulse was part of an operation, was that operation complete? Or paused? Or waiting for something else? Something ahead? The silence didn't answer. It never does. Silence just sits there, forcing you to confront your assumptions. And one assumption had already shattered. The belief that the universe doesn't notice us. Because whether 3I/Atlas was watching, or simply indifferent, the timing of the silence aligned too closely with our attention to ignore. That alignment felt personal, even if it wasn't. And that's what made it dangerous. Because when humans feel noticed, they change. The object continued its journey, calm, unbothered, unresponsive. And in that quiet stretch of days, something subtle happened on Earth. Certainty thinned, confidence softened. The need to explain gave way to the need to understand. Because silence is not emptiness. Silence is information withheld, and withholding implies choice. As 3I/Atlas drifted on, saying nothing. One final question lingered in every mind. Was the anomaly exhausted? Or was this the moment it realized we were paying attention? And if silence was the response, what happens when it decides to speak again? The word didn't arrive loudly. It didn't appear in headlines. It wasn't spoken into microphones. It surfaced in quiet rooms, behind closed doors, between careful pauses, artificial, not as a declaration, not as an accusation, as a question, a boundary the data kept leaning against, no matter how gently scientists pushed it away. At first, the word felt dangerous, not because it meant aliens, but because it meant responsibility. Because once you say artificial, you're no longer dealing with chance, you're dealing with intent. So the word was wrapped in softer language. Non-natural behavior, structured response, unknown mechanism. But everyone in the room knew what those phrases were hiding. The data had stopped asking for new equations. It was asking for a new category. The meetings were quiet. No raised voices. No dramatic arguments. Just screens glowing in dark rooms, showing the same graphs everyone had memorized by now. Light that paused, heat that shifted, pulses that appeared, then chose silence, all of it lining up too well. Someone finally said it out loud. If we assume this is artificial, does anything stop making sense? The room didn't answer right away, because the uncomfortable truth was, things made more sense. The hesitation near perihelion, regulation. The pulse, system, activity. The silence, operational control. The efficiency, design. Artificial wasn't a conclusion. It was a framework, and within that framework, the chaos settled. That's what terrified people most. Not that the idea was wild, but that it was calm, contained, logical. And logic has weight. No one wanted to cross that line officially, because crossing it would change the nature of the discovery forever. A natural anomaly is a mystery. An artificial object is a message, even if it says nothing. So the question shifted. Not, is it artificial? But what would artificial even mean? A probe? A relay? A relic? Something abandoned? Or something active? The data didn't scream intelligence. It whispered sophistication. No obvious communication. No dramatic maneuvers. Just quiet behavior that suggested foresight, planning. Constraints chosen long before it ever reached our sun. That raised a deeper question. If this is a machine, it wasn't built yesterday. It crossed interstellar space, cold, dark, empty, for time spans humans struggle to imagine, which means whoever built it understood patience, understood entropy, understood that the universe is hostile and prepared for it. That alone was humbling, because we struggle to keep machines alive for decades. This had survived for who knows how long, and it arrived intact, still functioning, still regulating, still choosing when to be seen. Someone asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Why here? Because random doesn't apply anymore. If this was built, then it was sent, or released, or allowed to drift, deliberately. And Earth sits in an unremarkable place. No rare star, no unique orbit, just another system among billions. So why pass through ours? The answer no one liked was also the simplest. Because we were there, because something here mattered. Not necessarily us. Maybe our sun. Maybe our planets. Maybe our noise. Our radio waves have been leaking into space for a century. A small, growing bubble of signal announcing our presence without asking permission. What if 3IATLAS wasn't arriving? What if it was checking in? That thought made people uncomfortable, because it reversed the narrative. We weren't discovering it. It might have already discovered us, and decided not to engage. The silence took on new meaning. If the pulse was internal activity and the silence followed attention, then maybe the object wasn't hiding. Maybe it was minimizing interference, like a scientist avoiding contamination. Observe, measure, pass through, leave. That interpretation softened the fear, but sharpened the awe, because it meant the object didn't see us as a threat or a priority, just part of the environment. Another data point. That hurt more than hostility ever could. Closed papers began circulating, carefully worded. No bold claims, Just phrases like, cannot be explained by known natural processes, consistent with non-random internal regulation. Artificial origin cannot be excluded. Those last words mattered. Cannot be excluded. That's science's version of standing at the edge of a cliff and admitting there's nothing left to measure behind you, only the fall forward. But no one jumped, because jumping would mean answering the next question. If this is a machine, who built it? And that question has no safe answers. An advanced civilization? A long dead one? Something that no longer exists? Or something that still does? Watching from very far away, each possibility was heavier than the last. And then came the final, quiet question. Why send it here? Not to communicate, not to land, not to announce, just to pass through. To observe how a young system behaves, how a noisy species reacts to uncertainty, how quickly assumptions collapse, how fear and curiosity wrestle for control. That idea felt uncomfortably familiar, because that's exactly what we do. We send probes. We watch silently. We gather data. We avoid interference until we decide not to. The mirror was hard to look into, because if this object was artificial, then we weren't dealing with gods, or invaders, or saviors. We were dealing with engineers, observers, explorers. And explorers don't announce themselves. They measure first. The realization settled slowly, heavily. This wasn't a movie moment. No countdown. No dramatic reveal. Just a line in the sand, drawn by data. On one side, chance. On the other, design. And 3I/ATLAS stood exactly on that line, refusing to step fully into either. As it continued its quiet journey toward perihelion, the word artificial lingered. Not spoken aloud, not written boldly, but present in every graph, every pause, every silence. The question was no longer hypothetical. If this is a machine, then someone built it. And if someone built it, then our solar system was not as empty as we thought. The object moved on, unchanged, unconcerned, leaving humans with the most unsettling realization of all. We might not be alone, not because something came to greet us, but because something passed by and didn't feel the need to say hello. At first, the story stayed contained, behind passwords, behind careful language, behind the quiet confidence of institutions built on certainty. But secrets don't stay small for long, especially not in a connected world. A phrase leaked here, a chart there, a line from a paper, stripped of context, shared without permission. Cannot be explained. That was all it took. The internet did the rest. Screens lit up, forums buzzed, videos appeared overnight. Theories multiplied faster than corrections ever could. 3I/ATLAS stopped being an object in the sky. It became a mirror. People didn't ask what it was doing. They asked what it meant. And meaning is dangerous. Because science is slow, but belief is fast. Some dismissed it immediately. Another hype cycle, another misunderstood graph. They needed it to be nothing, because nothing is comfortable. Others leaned in hard, calling it proof, calling it confirmation of aliens, of watchers, of gods wearing new names. They needed it to be everything. Between those extremes, something quieter happened. Trust began to bend. not break, bend. People who had never questioned astronomy started asking simple questions. Why didn't we notice this sooner? Why does the explanation keep changing? Why does it feel like no one is fully in control? Those questions weren't angry. They were curious. And curiosity is more disruptive than outrage, because outrage burns fast. Curiosity lingers. Late at night, people stared at the sky differently, not looking for lights, not expecting answers, just aware. Aware that the universe might not be as passive as we were taught. That awareness settled in places charts never reach. Dinner tables, group chats, quiet moments before sleep. The discovery was no longer about data. It was about perspective. For centuries, humans believed the universe was indifferent, beautiful, vast, uncaring. Stars burn, planets spin. Nothing notices. That belief was comforting. It put us at the center of meaning, even if not of space. But 3I/Atlas didn't challenge our importance. It challenged our assumptions. And that was worse, because assumptions are invisible until they fail. The assumption that objects don't respond. The assumption that patterns must be natural. The assumption that intelligence announces itself. Those assumptions cracked quietly. Not enough to cause panic, enough to cause doubt. Scientists gave interviews, careful ones, measured. They emphasized uncertainty. They stressed restraint. But restraint doesn't travel well online. Clips were cut, sentences shortened, context evaporated. And what reached the public wasn't fear. It was unease. The kind that makes people ask, what else don't we know? That question spread faster than any theory, because it wasn't about aliens. It was about authority, about certainty, about the idea that someone, somewhere, has the full picture. And suddenly, that picture looked incomplete. People noticed the pauses, the hesitations, the careful phrasing, not because scientists were hiding something, but because they didn't know. And not knowing, openly, was new. For generations, science had been the voice of confidence, of explanation, of answers. Now it sounded human, careful, uncertain, honest, and honesty unsettled people, because honesty admits limits. Social media split into camps. Some demanded answers now, others begged for silence. Don't speculate. Don't jump ahead. But speculation is what humans do when the ground shifts. It's how we regain balance. Religious groups weighed in, philosophers too, not to claim ownership of the mystery, but to ask what it meant for us. If the universe contains intention beyond Earth, what does that say about human uniqueness? If intelligence can exist without emotion, what does that say about consciousness? If something can pass through our system without noticing us, what does that say about importance? Those questions had no enemy, no villain, no solution. And that made them linger. The most interesting change wasn't fear, it was humility, a quiet one. People began to speak differently, less certain, more open. Statements turned into questions. Arguments softened into conversations. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to notice. Because when certainty bends, empathy sneaks in. The discovery stopped being about whether 3I/Atlas was artificial. That debate continued, but it wasn't the point anymore. The point was that our mental models had limits, that the universe didn't owe us clarity, that truth might exist without caring whether we understand it. That realization is heavy, because humans are storytellers. We like beginnings and endings, heroes and villains, clear causes, clear effects. 3I/Atlas offered none of that. No message, no threat, no reassurance, just behavior. Cold, measured, indifferent. And indifference is hard to process, because you can fight fear, you can worship wonder, but you can't negotiate with indifference. News cycles moved on. They always do. But something stayed. A residue. A sense that the sky had changed, even though it hadn't. People still went to work, still paid bills, still argued about small things. But somewhere in the background, a new awareness hummed, that we might not be the only ones who understand physics, that we might not be the only ones who build systems to cross darkness, that we might not be the only ones who observe silently. The discovery didn't shrink humanity. It reframed it. We were no longer the assumed center of complexity, just a participant, a young one, still loud, still curious, still fragile. And fragility became the quiet theme. Not physical fragility, conceptual fragility. The fragility of belief, of certainty, of the stories we tell ourselves to sleep at night. Some found that terrifying. Others found it freeing. Because if the universe is bigger than our beliefs, then our beliefs are not the final word. And that means growth is possible. The object continued its path, unaware or uninterested in the shift it caused. 3I/Atlas didn't trend, didn't argue, didn't explain itself. It simply existed, and in doing so, it exposed something deep and human. We are not disturbed by mystery. We are disturbed by mystery that doesn't need us. As the days passed, one question echoed quietly across minds and cultures. Not shouted, not demanded, just present. Are we prepared for a truth that doesn't care what we believe? Because if the universe is under no obligation to make sense to us, then understanding becomes a choice, not a guarantee. And 3I/Atlas had already made its choice. To pass through, to say nothing, to leave us with ourselves. And sometimes that's the most unsettling discovery of all. They tried to rewind it. That's how science deals with uncertainty. You go backward. You trace the path. You follow the motion. You ask where something came from, because origin explains intent. So they fed the data into models. Clean ones. Careful ones. They tracked 3I/Atlas back through time, past the orbit of Jupiter, past the edge of the solar system, past the last place the sun's gravity still has a name, out into interstellar space. And that's where things began to fall apart. At first, the path looked normal. A long arc, a clean approach, consistent with something that drifted between stars, untouched for millions of years. But as the models stretched farther back, the certainty thinned. Small uncertainties became large ones. Tiny errors widened into gaps. The trail began to blur, not because the math failed, but because space itself is crowded with influence. Passing stars, invisible clouds, gravitational whispers from objects we can't see. Interstellar space isn't empty. It's just quiet. And quiet hides a lot. The farther back they traced 3I/Atlas, the less it resembled a natural exile. Most interstellar objects tell a story. They come from somewhere, a system that broke them free, a star that threw them out. You can usually point to a region, a neighborhood, a rough home. This one had none. The models didn't converge. They dissolved. Each run told a slightly different story. Each origin point drifted farther from the last until somewhere became anywhere. And anywhere is not an answer. That unsettled people. Because randomness has fingerprints. Even chaos leaves scars. But this path didn't look chaotic. It looked curated, not guided, not steered, just unclaimed, as if the object didn't belong to any system long enough to be remembered. Someone described it as homeless. The word stuck. But homeless implies loss. And this didn't feel lost. It felt untethered. There's a difference. A rock ejected from a star carries the trauma of that event. Its motion reflects violence. 3IATLAS didn't. Its approach was calm, measured, almost elegant, as if it had been waiting, not wandering. The idea that it came from a known star system began to fade, not because it was impossible, but because nothing fit. No nearby star matched the timing. No cluster aligned with the velocity. Every candidate failed, quietly, one by one. The models kept reaching farther, deeper into the past, until the origin point slipped beyond meaningful resolution. Beyond history, beyond context. That's when the question changed. If it didn't come from somewhere we recognize, what does that make it? Natural objects are born of places, stars, disks, collisions. They have ancestry. This one didn't. At least, not one we could trace. The implication was subtle but heavy. If you can't point to a birthplace, then birthplace might not matter. And if birthplace doesn't matter, then maybe the object wasn't born at all. Maybe it was made, not grown, not broken off, constructed, built to exist between systems, built to drift without roots, built to survive alone. That idea felt colder than any alien fantasy, because it suggested a kind of intelligence that doesn't settle, doesn't colonize, doesn't build monuments, just sends things out, quietly, purposefully, across distances where origin becomes irrelevant. The models were refined again, more data added, better constraints. The uncertainty shrank, but the answer didn't sharpen. It vanished, like trying to trace a river back to a cloud. At some point, the question stops making sense, not because it's wrong, but because it assumes a structure that may not exist. We assume things come from places because we do. We have homes. We have origins. We have stories rooted in land and sky. But the universe doesn't owe us that symmetry. Maybe origin isn't a place. Maybe it's a decision. That thought lingered, uncomfortable. If 3I/Atlas was released, rather than launched, if it was allowed to drift, rather than aimed, then tracing it backward would always fail. Because there was no single moment of departure, no dramatic exit, just a gradual letting go, a long goodbye from something we'll never see. The object continued forward, indifferent to our questions. Its past dissolving as we chased it. And that dissolution mattered, because it stripped away the last comfort. That even if we didn't understand the object, we could at least understand where it came from. Now, even that was gone. No home star, no shattered system, no violent birth. just a presence, appearing from the dark, crossing our path, leaving again. The absence of origin changed the tone. This wasn't an invader. Invaders come from somewhere. This wasn't a refugee. Refugees flee something. This was something else. Something that treated the galaxy as terrain, not territory. And that reframing shook people more than any theory, because it suggested scale. A scale where stars are not destinations, just waypoints. The question echoed quietly through the data. If it didn't come from anywhere we recognize, then maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the real question isn't where it came from, but what kind of civilization builds things that don't need a home, that can wander indefinitely, that don't leave signatures, that don't announce themselves. Because that kind of civilization doesn't explore for survival. It explores because it can. The models timed out. The simulations ended. The past refused to resolve. And for the first time, scientists accepted something rare. There was no answer here. Only absence. And absence, when measured carefully enough, becomes information. 3I/Atlas carried no flag, no origin story, no address we could write back to. It wasn't lost, it was untraceable, and that made it something entirely new in human experience. Not a visitor from another star, but a traveler from outside our assumptions. As it continued its silent journey, one unsettling truth settled in. We may never know where it came from, because knowing where it came from might require understanding a way of existing that doesn't need a beginning. And if that's true, then the universe is not just older than we thought. It's more intentional, more patient, and far less centered on us than we ever imagined. This was the moment everything should have broken. Perihelion, the closest point, the harshest light, the place where comets scream or die. As 3I/Atlas fell toward the sun, expectations hardened. Heat would spike, ice would rupture, jets would flare uncontrollably. That's what proximity does. It strips objects down to instinct. It forces chaos. Every model said the same thing. If there were weaknesses, this is where they would show. If the anomalies were fragile, this is where they would collapse. If the strange behavior was coincidence, the sun would erase it. Instruments were ready. Eyes were fixed. This was the test no one could fake. The sun does not negotiate. The radiation intensified. Solar wind surged. Temperatures climbed to levels that tear normal objects apart from the inside. And then, nothing happened. No eruption, no runaway heating, no frantic release of energy. 3I/Atlas didn't flinch. The data streamed in, clean, controlled, almost calm. Where chaos was expected, stability appeared. Not frozen, not rigid, adaptive. Temperatures rose, then leveled. Brightness increased, then held. Motion stayed tight, precise. The object moved through the most violent region of the solar system like it had rehearsed this moment, because maybe it had. The thermal patterns sharpened, not larger, sharper, more defined. Heat was redistributed faster now, more efficiently, as if the system had entered a higher operating mode. The closer it came to the sun, the better it behaved. That was backward. Natural objects unravel under stress. They shed mass. They lose shape. They bleed energy. 3I/Atlas did the opposite. It focused, like a structure bracing itself under load. The pulse did not return, the silence held. And now that silence felt intentional, in a new way, not hiding, conserving. Every movement, every adjustment seemed to say the same thing. I was built for this. The sun pushed harder. The object responded faster. No hesitation now. No delays. The pauses that once appeared near heat thresholds were gone. This wasn't indecision. This was confidence. As if the system no longer needed to measure. As if it already knew the limits. Someone watching the real-time data whispered something no one corrected. It's not surviving, it's performing. That word hung in the air. Performing implies purpose. It implies a task being executed under expected conditions. And perihelion looked less like a threat and more like a checkpoint. The most unsettling detail wasn't how well the object held together. It was how little excess it produced. No dramatic flares. No wasteful eruptions. Just enough adjustment to remain stable. Perfectly within margins. Engineers recognize that kind of behavior instantly. It's what you designed for. The moment when everything is hardest and the system proves itself. The sun roared. Solar radiation battered the surface. And still, 3I/Atlas stayed quiet. Not dead, not inert. Active, balanced. As if the extreme environment was not an obstacle, but a condition it anticipated. The models updated. Again and again. They still failed. But now, in a different way. They no longer predicted destruction. They couldn't predict behavior at all. Because the object wasn't reacting like matter. It was reacting like architecture. Built layers, doing what they were meant to do. No one spoke much during perihelion. There was nothing to argue, nothing to reinterpret. The data was too clean, too composed. The chaos everyone expected simply never arrived. And that absence was deafening. If this were survival, it was survival without desperation. If this were chance, it was chance without error. And neither explanation felt honest anymore. The sun, for all its power, had revealed something, not weakness. Capability. Perihelion didn't expose cracks, it exposed design. Not in shape, not in form. In behavior, in restraint, in discipline. As the object began to move away from the sun, something subtle shifted in the room. Relief didn't arrive. Wonder didn't either. What arrived was acceptance. A quiet understanding that whatever this was, it wasn't fragile. It wasn't accidental. And it wasn't surprised by us, or by the sun. That realization reframed everything that came before. The pulses, the pauses, the silence. They weren't glitches. They were modes, states, operational phases. And perihelion wasn't a danger zone. It was a proving ground. The object passed through it flawlessly. No announcement, no triumph, just execution. As if this was only one step in a much longer journey. As 3I/Atlas began to drift outward again, cooling now, relaxing, returning to quieter behavior. One question lingered in every mind. If this was the moment it was designed for, then what was the rest of the journey for? Because machines built to endure stars are not built for nothing. And if perihelion revealed the strength of the system, then whatever comes next may reveal the reason it exists at all. It didn't leave with a sound, no final flare, no goodbye signal. no last message hidden in the noise. 3I/Atlas simply kept going. Past the orbit of Mars, past the paths of planets that never touched it, back toward the dark it came from. The inner system grew quiet again. Telescopes still tracked it, but the urgency was gone. The numbers flattened. The anomalies softened. The patterns faded into distance, not because they were resolved, because they were out of reach. The object was leaving the place where questions could be tested. And that felt final. For months, 3I/Atlas had bent attention toward itself, pulled human thought inward, forced scientists, skeptics, and believers into the same uneasy space. Now, as it drifted away, something strange happened. The mystery didn't follow it. It stayed here. The data ended the way all data eventually does. Signal too weak, resolution too low, noise swallowing detail. Graphs stopped updating, screens went dark, meetings ended with no conclusions. No press conference ever announced an answer, because there wasn't one. And yet, nothing returned to normal. That was the unsettling part. The object left. The effect didn't. People still looked at the old charts, replayed the pauses, the pulses, the silence, as if staring long enough might change what they meant. It never did, because the meaning wasn't in the data anymore. It was in us. Something had shifted, quietly, irreversibly. Before 3I/Atlas, the universe felt large, but empty. After it, emptiness felt unlikely, not crowded, not alive in the way movies promise, just intentional, as if the universe could contain purpose without caring who notices. That idea lingered, not as fear, as perspective. The scientists moved on, new projects, new missions. But the language stayed cautious, more careful, less absolute. Words like never and impossible appeared less often, because something had pressed against those words. And they had bent. Public attention drifted too. News cycles always do. New crises, new distractions. But beneath the noise, a quiet awareness remained. That certainty is fragile, that assumptions are temporary. That observation does not guarantee understanding. 3I/Atlas didn't threaten us, didn't enlighten us, didn't save or destroy anything. It simply passed through, and that was the hardest thing to accept, because humans are used to being the point of the story, the reason events happen, the center of consequence. This time, we weren't. The object didn't arrive for us. It didn't leave because of us. We were incidental. Observers, not participants. That realization cut deep, but it also opened something. A strange kind of maturity. If the universe doesn't revolve around us, then our role changes. We become students, listeners, caretakers of fragile understanding, not owners of truth. Some people asked the final question out loud. If this was a test, did we pass? The problem was, no one knew what the test was. Was it a test of detection? We noticed it. Eventually. Was it a test of restraint? We didn't interfere. We couldn't. Was it a test of interpretation? We argued. We doubted. We disagreed. But we didn't panic. We didn't collapse. We adapted. Or maybe there was no test at all. Maybe the object wasn't measuring us. Maybe it wasn't interested in us. Maybe it was doing something else entirely. Something so far beyond our scale that our presence barely registered. That possibility was humbling. Because it meant the most important outcome of this encounter wasn't about them, it was about us. About how we reacted to uncertainty. About how we handled the absence of answers. About whether we demanded meaning or allowed mystery to exist. In that sense, something did change. Human perception shifted. We became less certain of our place and more careful with our claims, less eager to label, more willing to wait. That might not sound dramatic, but on a cosmic timeline, it matters. The object continued outward, cold again, quiet again, carrying whatever it carried before it ever reached us. Patterns we only partially saw. Processes we never fully understood. A history we couldn't trace. A purpose we couldn't name. One day, it will be gone completely. Just another data point archived in old servers. A footnote, a curiosity. But the questions it left behind won't go with it. They'll stay. In science, in philosophy, in the quiet moments when we look up and realize the sky isn't just space, it's context. 3I/Atlas didn't give us answers. It gave us something harder. A reminder that the universe does not explain itself. That truth doesn't arrive on our schedule. That meaning is not guaranteed, even when intelligence might be. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real signal wasn't the pulse, or the heat, or the silence. Maybe the real signal was the way we responded, with curiosity instead of panic, with doubt instead of certainty, with humility instead of control. If this was a test, perhaps passing didn't mean understanding. Perhaps it meant accepting that some things move through our world, change us, and leave, without ever telling us why. And that learning to live with that might be the first step toward becoming the kind of species worth noticing again.